Oh, this is how famous people feel when they go to writing conferences and like their food's delivered. I was just like, what is this? Hey everybody, good morning. My name is Emily Paige Wilson. If you are new here, I'm a poet and I also write novels in verse for young adult readers. And today I'm going to share with you how much money I made from poetry in the year 2020. All right, friends, so we are here. I'm filming kind of early in the morning. I've got my decaf coffee, got my leaning bookshelf, which I hope is going to be one of those things that adds character to this channel, and then it just becomes like a reoccurring joke, like, oh yeah, Emily, how's your bookshelf doing? Huh? It's still leaning, friends. The reason that I wanted to make this video with y'all and share these figures is because I think transparency is really important, especially around financial issues. I really like how the poet Dimitri Reyes talks about how he has earned money for the last 3 or 4 years in the poetry field, and to see his growth has been really inspirational, and I really appreciate how he always pays his tips and tricks forward. I will leave his videos linked down below because I think that they're a great resource. I also wanted to make this video because I think a lot about how I would talk about money and the potential to earn income in the writing field to my students when I was a graduate teaching assistant, when I was an English adjunct. And I also think about how earning potential was spoken to me from my professors in my master's program. I think, and I'll speak from my experience, and so if y'all had a different experience, I'd love to hear about it down below in the comments so we can add more nuance to this dialogue. From my experience, it felt like money was almost, one, a taboo, but two, almost a dare, really. It was almost like, oh,
if you're a poet, you're not gonna make money.
Like me, and I was, in my early 20s, I was very stubborn. I'm a Capricorn sun, Taurus rising, Leo moon, like we've got a lot going on there. I was like, oh,
I'll make money.
But I think what's important is to have this transparency so that y'all can make your own decisions about whether the amount of work that goes into this craft and promoting the craft more so is worth the return on investment. And while I want to push gently against this, I think my boyfriend's really great about this. Like, he is such a talented poet and painter, and he's not as interested in trying to self-promote. He loves art for the sake of art. But I also know that there's a lot of us who would like to make a profit from the work that we share with the world. This transparency is really important to me so that if I look back at my past students, they can make the best informed decision of whether pursuing this craft is going to be something that's sustainable for them long term, not just financially, but also creatively and spiritually as well. Because unfortunately, in this capitalist society we live in, a lot of times we will attach value to the things that we create based on the monetary compensation that we receive. So I want to push back against that, but I also want to offer y'all a transparent overview of the money I earned last year. So, how much money did I earn? So last year I was able to break $1,000. Now, full disclosure, I did not keep track of my expenses because I did not know in 2020 that I would be filming this video. So this is just about profits, but at the end I will share with you guys a little bit about the cost of my chapbook specifically. So for 2020, I made $1,094.89. What I think is pretty phenomenal and something for which I am very grateful is that almost 60%, right, over $600 of my profit came from my Patreons. And if y'all are watching, and if you don't know how much I appreciate you, please know how much I am grateful. To me, it's such an amazing thing that an independent artist is getting supported monetarily by members of their community in the name of the art. Like, that to me, that investment in the art, it's not about me necessarily, even though I know that my Patreons are so supportive. It's that people are investing in art with their money, and I don't take that lightly as somebody who has not always had discretionary income. I receive that gift with a lot of gratitude. I want to encourage y'all, if you are thinking about ways to monetize your craft, if that's where you're at the process, and you've been interested in creating a Patreon, I would highly encourage you to check it out, run it for a little while, see how it feels. Again, I know there's a taboo about money and asking for money. I'm probably the wrong person to talk about fundraising because I enjoy it very much. I work in university advancement, and for me, it's such a gift to be able to partner with people who have discretionary income and they have a desire to pay it forward, and to be the bridge that then facilitates that resource delivery to people who are under-resourced, like students who need scholarships or artists who are trying to make their way in the world. And I wish that we lived in a society where we didn't have to do GoFundMes for our health insurance, where tuition rates weren't always inflating, and where poets and artists were compensated for their work. And I think having a small community of patrons is something that's really special, and it's something that I appreciate very much. And creating a Patreon page is also really important in that it provides another avenue for you as an artist to be able to share your art. So with my patrons, I always share a poem in progress every month. It'll typically be a first draft or a second draft before I begin submitting. So that's a cool behind the scenes thing. Sometimes there are polls where I'll ask for opinions about just really small, minute details in my work in progress. But if Patreons vote on something that's a small detail and then a few years down the road, they see it incorporated in a book, how cool is that, right? Just to break down my Patreon experience a little bit further, if you do go into creating a Patreon page, I think it's always really important to remember that your patrons are doing this to support your art, and it's a gift. It is not necessarily an obligation. I think a lot of times, again, thinking about a capitalist framework, we're always expected to grow and to have these productivity graphs that just look like a straight shot upwards, and I don't think that that's realistic. Your income from Patreon will be, it will fluctuate. You'll have to be flexible with it. Before the pandemic, I think I was making, maybe $80 or $90 a month, and then that dropped off to closer to 50 or 45 after the pandemic, because obviously people need to be able to protect themselves and ensure their financial security first. So just keep that in mind going in. And the money that I earn from Patreon is so helpful. Typically in any given month, it'll cover the expenses of submission fees if I am submitting to individual journals. It will also help me with paying for book contest fees, which can sometimes be $20, $25 a piece when I'm submitting full-length manuscripts. For contest fees, it's really helpful. And I also was able to, for the first time ever, I paid for my groceries to be delivered, and I felt so bougie. I was like, oh, this is how famous people feel when they go to writing conferences and like their food's delivered. I was just like, what is this? To all my patrons, thank you, because you let me live out a very bougie Sunday afternoon where I could clean the fridge while the groceries arrived, and then I could just put everything in a clean fridge, and I just felt like on top of the world. So the next thing that I want to talk about is the money that I made off of my chapbook. I did have a chapbook release last year, and it's interesting because not every year will you have a piece be published, a piece like a chapbook or a full-length collection. But then at the same time, typically you're able to make money off of readings, and I wasn't able to do that. So this year's earnings are a little bit skewed in my favor because I did have a book come out, but then also against a lot of working writers because we weren't able to make money off of book sales in-person reading. If you don't know, my chapbook is entitled Hypochondria, Least Powerful of the Greek Gods. It was released last August from Glass Poetry Press. I think the world of the press. I think the world of the editor, Tony Frame. My boyfriend did the cover art, so like I said, very talented artist. And I'm really proud of this book because it explores my relationship with health anxiety. It was really empowering for me to be able to take my health anxiety and then to craft from that experience art, which I hope will resonate with people. And while I think anybody who had a book come out in 2020 will say that that was a really difficult journey to navigate, I'm also really grateful that this book came out when a lot of us were feeling more isolated. We were more concerned about our health and our health of loved ones, because I hope this book has been a resource and has added some comfort, or at least the feeling of not being alone, to those who read it during the pandemic. And I will also leave information below in case you want to pick up your own copy. For the revenue for this chapbook, you'll see that I've broken it down into 3 different sections. And I want to talk very briefly about why I chose to do that, because I think it makes a difference in terms of how much money you earned in pre-sales, royalties, and then from the sale of the book itself. But what I want to emphasize is that almost a quarter of that, $112, came from pre-sales. Now, if y'all are artists yourself, if you're writers, if you're friends with writers, I'm sure you have seen so many social media posts talking about how pre-sales are so important to the success of a book. And I think that the numbers highlight that here. 25% of all of the money that I made from my chapbook last year was in pre-sales. I feel like you have heard it to death how important pre-sales are. I'm just here to add one more reminder to you that pre-sales are super important in supporting the writers in your life. Now, I also made $269 selling the books myself. That profit margin would have been a lot higher, and I realize this is just revenue as opposed to profit. That would have been so much higher had I been able to sell books in person. So for Glass, I believe they sell the books at $8.50 per copy. When I do signed copies, I usually sell them for $10 just because people tend to have 5s and 10s. It's easier that way. Sometimes you can get them on Glass's website for $7.50. I think that's also the pre-sale price. The way that book sales worked this year was that I would create either newsletters or social media posts telling people how they could purchase a copy, and then I would send the copies to them via mail. That's my little plug to support your local post office. But I do want to be really transparent in the fact that had I been tracking my expenses, I probably would have just broken even on chapbooks. With Glass Poetry, it costs about $3 per author copy. So I reached out to my editor, Tony, who's fantastic. I'm like, hey, Tony, can you send me a bundle of X amount of chapbooks? I've sent you X amount of dollars. He sends those to me. And so, let's say I sell them for $3 to get the author copies. Then there's also shipping costs me between $1.50 and $2. So for the sake of math, let's say $2. Or not for the sake of math. Math is fine. Math could do those fractions and decimal points. For the sake of me, early morning, let's say $2. So now we're at a $5 profit, but also in 2020, it was really important for me to be able to pay things forward as well, especially in terms of equity and racial justice. So all of the chapbook sales that I made, my royalties, my pre-sales, the sales from individual books, I donated 20% of that to the Black Women's Health Imperative, and I'll leave their information linked down below. They're a nonprofit that fights for racial equity within the medical space. And as somebody who, has had my own trouble, which you can learn about in the chapbook, feeling invalidated in the medical space, it's really important for me to be able then to provide resources and exposure to people who are fighting for that cause as well. So that would be another $2. So essentially at this point, I'm probably making $2 to $3 off of the chapbook that I bank. So again, just for the sake of transparency and clarity, that I'm selling the books for $10, but I'm sure as a lot of small business owners know, your revenue and your profit are very different. So just sharing that with you guys in case you're about to sell chapbooks or books, or you don't know if that's a typical experience or not. This was how the numbers broke down for me with the chapbooks. It leaves us with about $53 in royalties. I get royalty checks every 6 months, I believe, and those are always just a pleasant surprise when you get those, because it happens, twice annually, so it's not at the forefront of your mind, so it's just really nice to see that money go through. And the last little bit of money that I made, although it's not little, it's $50, I made $50 being a semifinalist in a writing contest, which I always really appreciate. It's always really validating when journals are able to compensate you for your work, and sometimes they're not in a position to, again, just because this capitalistic model in which we live and the expenses that editors and journals have, they're not always able to provide financial compensation, and that doesn't mean that they value your work any less. It's because the arts are so underfunded. And I will say in 2020, I was not submitting to as many journals and contests as I usually do. Because I work as a poet and as a young adult novelist, I have to split my time up between, okay, when am I working on a poetry project, which usually comes with trying to submit a certain number of poems every month, versus when I don't really engage in that process at all, and I'm only working on writing or editing a novel in verse. Typically, if I'm writing a novel in verse, which I was doing for most of 2020, I think I submitted to my agent February, and then we went on submission in October. A lot of 2020 was promoting my chapbook and then also working on my novel in verse, my Hurricane Florence project. It wasn't really writing and generating new poems for my current work in progress, which I think I've shared. I'll link the card up for the video. It's about Marie Lafarge, who is just a very interesting historical figure. Did she poison her husband with a fruitcake? Did she not? I'm being flippant about it, but it is really a fantastic story, and I think that there's a lot of evidence to say that she was coerced into this marriage unethically, and you can read about it more online, obviously, but hopefully when I finish that project and when I'm able to share it with y'all in book form. But I did share a poem from it earlier. To recap, I made a little bit less than $1,100. I am keeping track of my expenses for this year so that when I can say how much money I made in 2021 next year, I will have a better sense of the profit and not just the revenue to share with y'all. For now, I plan to continue to be transparent with these numbers unless, fingers crossed, unless I do land a book deal this year or early next year with my young adult novel in verse. I know that some agents and some editors do not appreciate people talking about the specifics of book advances. If I am able to get a book deal, I know that it's a social taboo to talk about those numbers, but I think that the hashtag what publishing paid me is really important. And again, I think transparency illuminates so much, whether that's in terms of me sitting down and talking to y'all and saying, hey, as a small poet, this was my revenue in case you're interested, in case you're going through your own journey, or if it's something that has higher stakes, like the what publishing paid me hashtag, which illuminates racial inequity within publishing houses. So I don't have a problem talking about numbers and being really transparent, but I probably would get some advice moving forward if and when I'm able to land a book deal in the YA sphere. So thank you guys for hanging out. If you have any questions, please let me know down below in the comments. I'd love to know what financial successes you had last year, or if you know that there's kind of a financial pitfall in your writing process and promotion process so far. I'd love to hear about that as well. I'm really curious when it comes to other people's experiences, and I think, again, conversation and transparency around these numbers is really interesting and important. And the money that I don't donate from writing, we keep in a savings account.
It's called the wedding fund. So if you want to help me pressure my Libra boyfriend into proposing,
feel free to join my Patreon. He's gonna kill me. It's fine. So as always, I really appreciate your time. Thanks for hanging out with me, and I'll see you guys next time.